We're in the middle of a series called Why Believe? And we started this a couple of weeks ago and looked at a couple of initial questions. First question was, why believe in God? And we looked at why believe the Bible? And today we're going to look at why believe in creation. And these are designed to help you think about, first of all, how you might answer someone else's question that they might bring to you, but also to help you deal with the questions and struggles that you have. And all of us have been confronted with these issues at one level or another throughout our walk and our faith. Most of us began to deal with this issue of creation probably at someone maybe in high school biology class, where many of us were taught that all life sprang from non-living matter millions of years ago, and those initial cells then evolved into all of the variety of life that we see today through a process of natural selection. So, are we a product of primordial ooze, or are we a unique creation of God? Well, the Bible first statement in Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So, which is true? Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed by God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." But does that mean that creation is just an issue of faith? Is that all it is? How do we relate faith and reason, science and the Bible, evolution and creation? Well, good Christians have differed in their answer to those questions. And I want to begin this morning by looking at different approaches to science and the Bible and how they relate to one another, how people have related them to one another. Some people see the Bible and science is in conflict, that these are in direct contradiction to one another. That some Christians see Genesis 1, for example, teaching that God created all life in a period of 6 24-hour days, some 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and that any kind of evolutionary process, therefore, is impossible. Likewise, in this conflict, some scientists, like Richard Dawkins, hold to this conflict model, and they propose that a philosophical naturalism that excludes any religious faith at all, that it's completely invalid. As Richard Dawkins says, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate the evidence. On the other end of this spectrum of trying to fit these two together, we find some people hold to what we would call an independent model, where science and the Bible operate in completely different spheres. That faith is mainly private, a subjective matter, and that science, instead, science and religion have nothing to say to each other. As Gerald Zillezer says, science and religion supplement each other. Science explains how the world is. Religion explains why the world is. Science explains material processes. Religion attributes meaning to these processes. Now, between these two sort of options, there's a range in which Christians take more moderate or more complex approaches to these issues. And sometimes these are referred to as either dialogue or integration. An example of integration would be those who look at the Big Bang Theory and see it as proving that the universe is not eternal and didn't pop into being uncaused, but see it as fitting perfectly with the Bible's explanation that in the beginning God created the universe. Some Christians hold that Genesis 1 should not be interpreted literally as 24-hour days, but as indefinite periods of time. This is since the word day is used this way in other places in Scripture, such as in Genesis 2:4. Still others interpret Genesis 1 as a poetic framework, which describes God bringing order out of chaos. Another example in this area would be some Christians who hold to some form or another of theistic evolution, that God created life and then he brought about the many life forms that we see today through the process of natural selection. Some believe in evolution as a process without believing necessarily in the philosophical naturalism, that sort of all-encompassing theory that everything has a natural cause and that all life is solely the product of random forces guided by no one. You can also believe in microevolution, that is changes within a species, without necessarily accepting macroevolution. My point today is not to defend one of these positions in particular, but rather to look at the issues overall and answer some of the most basic questions. In the case of the question of creation, is really a question of origins. And that addresses three sort of key issues: the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of human beings. And there's an awful lot that's been written in each of these areas over the past several years. To be honest, I've been pretty overwhelmed trying to read, comprehend some of that, and try to condense or at least make some decisions of what to present here this morning. And again, I want to refer you to the suggested bibliography that I've put together. And I've added to it from the past couple of weeks another section on the whole area of why believe in creation. And copies of this are available on the welcome table. You can pick that up, and perhaps you want to do some more reading in this area. One of the places you might want to start is this book, The Case for the Creator, by Lee Strobel. It's an excellent overview of the different areas and interviews that he's done with leading scientists in each of the areas that could be addressed in this section. I have a few copies of this on the welcome table that you can at least look at and thumb through. I'd ask that you not take all of them, so at least there'd be a couple available for the next service. So this morning I want to try to present a few of these issues in the form of looking at some of the problems with evolution and the evidence for creation. The first of these I would refer to as the evidence of design in the universe. Now, several weeks ago, I presented the teleological argument, and I referred to the fine-tuning of the universe that enables life to even exist, and as an example of design, and how cosmologists today are recognizing this in the area of physics, that chance alone cannot account for this anthropic principle. As astrophysicist John O'Keefe has said, if the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. And goes on to say, it is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in. And it's kind of like the difference, when you're looking at this evidence for design and creation, it's kind of like the difference between seeing the Rocky Mountains and seeing Mount Rushmore. We can understand that unintelligent physical forces like plate tectonics and erosion are quite sufficient to explain the existence of the Rocky Mountains. But if you'd never heard of Mount Rushmore and you were on a hike and you suddenly came upon that view of Mount Rushmore, it'd be very difficult to look at that and not recognize that there is some design that was involved in that scene. In the same way, the evidence has led many, in fact, former atheists like Patrick Glynn, who concluded that today the concrete data point strongly to the direction of the God hypothesis. It is the simplest and most obvious solution to the anthropic puzzle. As David wrote in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world." So we see this evidence in the design in the universe. In a similar way, there are physical marks of design that are visible in aspects of biology. And here, particularly, look at the evidence of biochemistry. Some of you may recall in your early biology textbooks pictures of the experiment by Stanley Miller. It took place in 1953, where he recreated, supposedly, the prebiotic soup and then introduced sparks of electricity, and that claimed that these produced the building blocks of life. That evolutionists then concluded that through nothing more than random chance, these chemicals assembled themselves into the first living cells. This is known as abiogenesis, life from non-life. But in the past 30 years, scientists have done further studies and have exposed many of the problems with this original and the following experiments. First of all, they've noticed that the early Earth atmosphere was not anything like the one used in Miller's experiment. They've shown that the primitive Earth never had any methane, ammonia, or hydrogen, but this is what Miller needed in order to get the results that he wanted. Instead, the early Earth was composed atmosphere of water, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and oxygen, and in fact was a reducing atmosphere. Secondly, the experimental conditions in these different experiments that were done were so artificially simplified that they bear virtually no resemblance to the actual processes that would have taken place in a primitive Earth. Third, there's this enormous gap between the most complex of the prototype cells, these simple cells that supposedly are produced in a laboratory, and the actual simplest living cell. See, when Darwin proposed his theory, his model for evolution, his understanding of the cell was very primitive. It was just sort of he viewed it as a homogeneous glob of protoplasm. He had no idea of the complexity that we know of today. In fact, scientists now refer to the chemical machines that are at work inside every living cell that make up every living creature. Came across this video that Ben Stein put together called Expelled, and there's a short clip of it that gives you an incredible view into these machines that the scientists now refer to, the chemical proteins and processes that take place within every living cell of every living creature. So I want us to take a look at this short video clip.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, published it in 1859. He had an idea of the cell as being quite simple, correct?
Yeah, everybody did.
Okay. If he thought of the cell as being a Buick, What is the cell now in terms of its complexity by comparison?
A galaxy.
If Darwin thought a cell was, say, a mud hut, what do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where, on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make proteins. So we have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
The cell really is like nothing we've ever seen in the physical world. That's got to be firmly grasped. That's not something we can just say, oh, well, it's just a little bit more of the same old, same old. It's not the same old, same old.
We are finding is that there's information that's in the cell that cannot be accounted for in terms of these undirected material causes. So
It has to be.
And so there's some other, so it has to be an information source.
So one of the key questions faced by modern biology is, where do you get information from?
Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Available now on DVD and Blu-ray.
As Dr. Michael Denton, a research biologist, wrote in Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, is it really credible that random processes could have constructed a reality, the smallest element of which, a functional protein or gene, is complex beyond our own creative capacities, a reality which is the very antithesis of chance, which excels in every sense anything produced by the intelligence of man? The question the video concluded with is, so where's the source of this information? I think this leads to the third problem with evolution, or evidence for creation, and that is the problem of irreducible complexity. Biochemist Michael Behe, in his book Darwin's Black Box, challenged Darwinian gradualism with the concept of irreducible complexity. This term refers to the fact that a system has several component parts that interact with each other, and any one part, if it's taken away, the system doesn't work anymore. A simple example of this that he uses is that of a mousetrap. Classic mousetrap is made of a wooden platform, a metal spring, a trigger of some kind, and the metal flap that catches the mouse. If you take any one part away from the mousetrap, you don't get a mousetrap that works half as well. It doesn't catch half as many mice. It doesn't catch any mice. It doesn't work. That's an example of irreducible complexity. All the parts have to be in place for the system to function at all. And what Behe does is he goes on and looks at various biological systems and shows that they have this same characteristic. He gives examples of this irreducible complexity in systems such everything from cilia and flagella in single-cell organisms to the protein transport system within every cell. You saw a little bit of that visualized in the video. And the intricate processes of blood clotting. And in these biological systems, if any one component, one protein, one element, one physical part in the process, the system doesn't work at all. And thus, if the organism evolved as a few components over time, by random chance, there simply was no benefit to that organism because those one or two pieces wouldn't function, wouldn't accomplish what the whole system would do. Therefore, these systems could not have evolved gradually. You need all the parts, or you have nothing. As microbiologist James Shapiro conceded in his review of Behe's book, he writes, "There are no detailed Darwinian accounts for the evolution of any fundamental biological or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations." Thus, Behe concludes, irreducible, complex systems are strong evidence of a purposeful, intelligent design by an intelligent agent. The fourth evidence for creation is that in the whole area of DNA and information theory. Now, this is fairly complex, and I'm not going to try to explain it here this morning. But I would like to give you a quote from George Johnson, a researcher in this area, and he writes, "Human DNA contains more organized information than the Encyclopedia Britannica. If the full text of the encyclopedia were to arrive in computer code from outer space, most people would regard this as proof of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. But when seen in nature, it is explained as the workings of random force." The idea that random mutations alone, with enough time and enough chance, could create this information of this complexity, not only also denies the second law of thermodynamics, as illustrated by Sir Frederick Hoyle in his now somewhat famous statement, "The probability of higher life forms emerging by chance are comparable to the odds that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the material there." Now, there are other issues that could be raised. Again, I refer you to the bibliography and do some reading on your own in this area. The whole area of the fossil record and the evidence there, how paleontology has failed to come up with the fossil missing links or transitional forms. Instead, we have this, what's now known as the Cambrian explosion, in which virtually all animal forms suddenly appear in the fossil record, fully formed, with a sort of an incredible quantum leap in biological complexity. Also, we have the evidence of human consciousness and a whole research and study that's been done in this area. But whether you look outwardly at the evidence from the universe, or you look inward at the evidence of microbiology in a cell, what we see is evidence for intelligent design. But in spite of the evidence, there are those who do not believe in creation because they would then have to acknowledge a creator. As Cambridge anatomist Sir Arthur Keith said, evolution is unproven and unprovable. We believe in it only because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. Let's look briefly then at why creation matters. Creation matters because if there's a creator, then life has purpose, has meaning. I am not just a product of chance. That life has value because life comes from God, and we have therefore a basis for moral obligation and human rights. Secondly, if there is a creator, then I'm accountable for my life. As Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Here's where some people have their biggest problem with creation. That if there is no creator, then we are free to live as we please, accountable to no one. But if there is a creator, then I am accountable for my life. And there is one who has designed and called me into account. And if there is a creator, then our response should be one of gratitude. And we bow before the God and acknowledge him as the cause and creator of all that exists. As Revelations 4:11 says, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." So what do you need to do to respond to this message today? Well, perhaps, again, you may be very interested in this area. This may just intrigue you because of your background or because of questions you have or questions you've been confronted with. And perhaps you need to pick up one of the books that in the bibliography and begin to do some research and read some more and be able to address some of those issues on your own. But it could be that for you this morning, the first step for you is simply to acknowledge God as creator of all, to bow before him and acknowledge him, to thank him for making you as a unique creation in his world. Wherever you are in that process and in responding to God, know that God not only has created you uniquely in this universe, but he has intervened in this world in the person of Jesus Christ because he wants to know you, and he wants you to know him in a personal way. Let me ask you, all of you now, to take out that connection card that Steve referred to. And if you turn it over on the back, there's a place there for you to mark and indicate your next step. So let us know what God's been speaking to you, to kind of as an accountable piece for you to say, I need to respond. There are some things I need to do to continue to respond to God in this whole area of creation. And there's some options there that you can check which of those are right in your own in terms of your response and the next step for you to take. It could be that you also want some more information. You can indicate that over on the other side. Indicate your prayer requests. I'd ask you to just take a moment and fill that out, and then put